We're jumping straight in with this one, but before we do, let me just say, I'm Harley. This is all I'm saying is, here we tell true crime stories, but we also do the odd occasional stranger than fiction. The disclaimers are a must before we start. This is a true story, it is a real crime, it involves real people, and they've got families. So I do want you to share and comment, but please be a bit sensitive as you do so. Aaron Dean Barley was born in July 1993. He was a product of an incest relationship between a niece and an uncle. Before Aaron was born, his parents did have another child. Unfortunately, that child died in 1990 at just 2 years old. He had a blood clot on the brain and he had a pancreatic tumour. His dad was called Brian and he was a factory worker. He was 19 years older than his mom and he died of cancer at 56 years old. That means Aaron was just 4 years old. Aaron and his mum Jane, who were a psychiatric nurse, moved from Birmingham to Blackpool to be near her mum. And then in 1999, she did marry again. But a year later, in the year 2000, she died of a heart attack. She was only 38 years old. Aaron was now 7 years old and living with his grandmother. But that didn't last too long either, because after just over a year, at the end of 2001, she died at the age of 61. And now, at just 8 years old, Aaron was an orphan. For the next years, he'd be in and out of care homes. Now, I do want to set the record straight here, because although the media is quite good at just fabricating stories, especially when it comes to filling in missing pieces that they don't know, but I read somewhere that he was abandoned by his neglectful family. And that's not very fair. His mum and dad died, and so did his grandmother. They didn't abandon him. They had no choice. They didn't choose to leave him. And I think in this particular matter, the reason I wanted to put that out there is because that's two very different things, and it's quite cold to say that. And I would say without any background, but one paper quoted his uncle saying that they treated him like a burden while they were still alive. But again, that's not necessarily being neglectful, and it's not necessarily abandoning him. So I think them claims were outright disgraceful. Aaron ended up in the Uplands Children's Home in the Blackwell area of Bromsgrove. But from there, he quite often ran away. On one occasion, a police search was initiated because him and two other friends had disappeared for 3 days. This also made newspaper articles, and apparently the children's home were notorious for violence, and it had a lot of mentally unwell children in the home. The people in the local area said that they shouldn't have been in there, they should have been in a better equipped facility that were trained to deal with them children. The neighbours also complained that the children were out of control that were in there. They said that there were intimidation and there were noise and there were litter. I kind of think noise and litter is a lot less than intimidation, but they were the sorts of complaints that were coming about this children's home. But it weren't only complaints. It's claimed that there were several children stabbed in the home or at the home. It was that bad that the police even ended up stationing an officer just outside. With his youth being marred with violence, he failed to stay away from it, and at the age of 12 he wrote a hit list of people he'd like to kill. And at about that time, still at the age of 12, he was arrested for the first time. Later on, at the age of 15-year-old, he was sent to a Young Offenders Institute. Ultimately, he's ended up with quite the rap sheet, but we'll look at that a little bit later on. When Aaron was 10, he was given a good chance at a stable life. Eileen Adams were teaching at a school that were especially for people that had been excluded from school. Her and her husband were senior members of Hasbury Methodist Church. They were good, honest people, and Aaron ended up in their care. He stayed with them for 3 or 4 years, ranging from 2003 to 2007, but they were unable to cope with his violent personality. It was also about this time, so in 2007, that he left school after a fight. He was in year 9, so probably about 13, 14-year-old, and according to a fellow pupil, he weren't very much liked within the school. I did read that the main reason he weren't liked, he didn't have friends with people, is he said quite gruesome graphic things about people's mums, or what he'd like to do to the mums. But I'm sure it was a bit more than that of why people didn't like him. The church that Eileen Adams and her husband attended often prayed for him. And there is a parallel throughout this story, which I don't include, that every time he's in trouble, the church is called or it's encouraged to pray for him. So there was always underlying support from Eileen Adams and her husband and the church, although the church didn't like him very much, probably because of his violent attitude. In 2012, he was in trouble with the law again. He was 18-year-old and he had to serve 3.5 years in prison. But this time, it was quite a lot worse than usual. He'd beat his ex-girlfriend with a length of wood. He'd hit her with a wood about 50 times until it had broke his hand. And then after that, he tried to stab her and he stamped on her face. After serving his time, he left prison in 2015, and at which point he floated between hostels and the streets. One newspaper article claimed that he idolised Charles Bronson. Now, Charles Bronson is a notorious violent prisoner in the UK, but he has never ever killed anybody. He's took a lot of people prisoner and done stuff like that, hostage, whatever, but he's never actually killed anyone. And I don't know if this newspaper knew that or it was just speculating that he idolised this person. And it's quite imaginable of why they would speculate that, because he told a volunteer that he had two aims in life. One was to kill a copper, his words, and the other was to kill a prison officer. But like I said, Charles Bronson never did any of them things. He never killed anybody. So there is a big mislink there if that's where they got it from. But despite him telling a volunteer this, it was dismissed, and they just thought it was drug-induced bravado. And it didn't go anywhere. And what's a modern day crime if it doesn't involve Facebook? Aaron also around this time took to Facebook to post that he had a dream of chopping people up. While Aaron Barley was spending time on the streets in 2015, this is where he met the kind-hearted Tracey. She'd seen him outside Tesco's sleeping rough. Rumour has it that he was in a box when she found him. So let's introduce Tracey Wilkinson and her family. Tracey was the former British Latin American ballroom dancing champion. She was 50-year-old and it said that she'd previously struggled with alcohol. But she'd got clean at a rehab centre, which she continued to visit after that as a support worker. She was loving, caring, kind and generous, as well as a wonderful mother and daughter. She always put others before herself. She was the mother of two, and at the time, the eldest daughter was 18-year-old and at university. Her son Piers was 13-year-old, a fun-loving, friendly, happy boy who loved computer games, the Carry On movie series, Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. He said he had an infectious laugh and made everyone smile. He was a smart lad that was destined to become an engineer. He was living at home with his mom and dad, Peter. Peter and Tracey were married, and Peter owned an engineering company in South Wales. And that's about as much as I could find on the family, but it is said that Tracey did a lot of volunteering to help elderly people. She was chatty, she was comforting, and she liked to help people whenever she could. So with all that in mind, it really don't come as a surprise that when she came across 22-year-old Aaron sleeping rough in Tesco's car park in 2015, that she invited him in to their family home, which was apparently a luxurious property, for some food and to clean up. She was saw an opportunity to do some good, and that's what she did. She took him in and she helped him out. However, at this time, Aaron didn't stay at the home, which is quite acceptable. You wouldn't want a complete stranger living in your house. But he did become a regular visitor. He was doing odd jobs for food and cash. And it's easy in hindsight as I tell this story to say, well, do you know, he had got a history of violence, look what he did to his ex, blah, blah, blah. But obviously Tracey didn't know that at this time. And not every single homeless person deserves to be there, I say in quotes. Or not every single homeless person's violent or a drug addict. You know what I mean? And I quite do look at what Tracey did and think, well, although it is very brave, and arguably slightly naive, you can't fault her for what happens next. Their relationship blossomed, and on more than one occasion, he'd refer to her as the mother he never had, or his second mother. Tracey's next great thing she did for Aaron was to introduce him to Atlantic House. Atlantic House was a rehabilitation centre, and that's where she'd previously gone when she was having trouble with alcohol. By the end of the summer, Mr. Peter Wilkinson, Tracey's husband, had arranged a job for Aaron at a company that he owned. It was in the Newport docks. He'd paid for a flat there for Aaron, and he'd got him a mobile phone contract. I mean, come on, how much more can you do for somebody? Just amazing. Things did get off to a great start. Aaron would turn up to work, and he was doing his role quite well. But that didn't last too long until Aaron was back on the drugs, he stopped turning up for work, and he eventually got evicted from his flat, although I'm not quite sure the exact reasons for his eviction. By autumn, Aaron was back on the streets of Sawbridge and Tracey was there to help him once again. I actually read that it was in October 2016 and Peter had come home and Aaron was sleeping on the driveway. This time was different. Aaron was staying at the family's house. He was living there. But that was only until he found council accommodation. He did find some council accommodation, he moved into it, but at that point he was still visiting the family regular and he was eating there, he even had Christmas dinner there. Aaron later on found a job as a furniture polisher, he moved out of the council accommodation into his own flat, but again, apparently he didn't keep this job very long and he was back on the streets taking drugs and he couldn't be bothered to work. Now we're at about February 2017 and he sees contact with the Wilkinsons, and after 3 weeks of not having contact from him, they kind of thought, well, he must be doing alright, and cut off his phone contract. Roughly about that time, he'd also made some threatening posts on Facebook. The posts were about taking down his family and wondering how many people he could kill before he got caught. His former foster mum, who I presume were Eileen, she saw these posts and she contacted him and she asked him to get help, but he refused because he didn't want to take medication and he didn't want to be sectioned. The court heard later on that she was that concerned she did contact the police. One of his Facebook posts read, "To all my family that haven't spoke to me in years, go hook yourself. You're all going to pay. You cold, heartless mother." In another post he wrote, "Got to get myself help before I go on a killing spree." In the weeks leading up to Thursday the 30th of March 2017, Aaron was hanging about around the Wilkinsons area. He was drinking, he was socialising and he was taking drugs. Then on Thursday the 30th of March 2017, Tracey, Peter and the son Pierce were all at home. Linda was still away at university. As usual, at 7:30 in the morning, less than an hour after sunset, Peter took the dog for a walk. Before leaving, he apparently asked Piers if he wanted to come with him, but Piers said, "No, I'm staying in bed, I'll come with you tomorrow." So with Tracey and Piers still in bed, Peter took the dog for a walk. As usual, he left through the kitchen, the back door. As he left the door unlocked as he always did. Unbeknown to Peter or anyone in the house, that Aaron had been lurking and hiding in the garden and on the driveway since the early hours. In fact, he'd even tried to get access to the house during the night, but there was no easy way in, so he decided to just wait out and hide out. His movements around the property were caught on the family's home CCTV. In an effort to minimise his visibility, while hiding amongst the cars, he took off his light-coloured jacket and hid it under the car. He even put black socks over his light-coloured shoes to further minimise his visibility. At about 4 AM, he entered the garden shed. He left the shed about 35 minutes later with a claw hammer in hand. He ended up leaving the claw hammer on the patio, and then the CCTV shows him crawling back and forth across the garden. Finally, at about 7:30 in the morning, when Peter leaves the house, he hides behind some bushes until Peter leaves. Once Peter had left, Aaron now used the kitchen door to enter the house. He grabbed a kitchen knife, went upstairs and killed both Tracey and Piers. He stabbed them both multiple times with severe force. He stabbed Piers 8 times, and the injuries led to his lungs collapsing. One wound almost divided his spinal cord. Tracey had at least 17 stab wounds, some of which went as deep as 15 centimetres. He stabbed her through the bedding, and there were dirty marks to suggest that he'd climbed onto the bedding to stab her. After the attack, he left the knife on her bed. Peter returned just shy of half an hour, just before 8 AM. He went to open the kitchen door, but as he did, he was confronted by Aaron. Aaron was dressed in black, wearing gloves and a balaclava. Aaron stabbed and slashed at him, so obviously Peter's backing away, and as he does, he moves into the frame of the CCTV. Aaron's hands raised in the air. Peter's still backing up and he's pleading with him, please, stop it, don't. And Aaron just responds, "Die, you bastard." But for some unknown reason, Aaron then fled. He drove off in the family's Land Rover, of which he'd got the keys from inside the house. The judge later used this to show that Aaron had complete control and he'd planned it. Despite being left in the garden with stab wounds to his chest and his back, Peter managed to phone for the police. They arrived with paramedics shortly after 8:15. Mrs. Tracey Wilkinson was found dead. Pierce was alive, but he went into cardiac arrest and could not be saved. I did see some details of how Tracey and Pierce were found, but I didn't really want to go into that because there weren't that much detail. I didn't think it was that relevant, and I think the story's bad enough without adding them small, disturbing details. Peter was operated on for 2 incised wounds to the abdomen and 2 to the bowel. He spent 11 days in hospital, a week of which was in critical care. He was obviously in enormous pain, and he received over 100 stitches and staples. But Aaron didn't really get away. Yeah, he'd stole the Land Rover and drove off, But the police spotted this Land Rover quite quickly, and they followed Aaron. He drove increasingly dangerously, putting the lives of the public and officers at risk. Like out of some sort of sick video game, chasing away from the police, he mounted pavements in built-up areas at a busy time of the day, he collided with one police car, injuring 2 police, and he finally crashed into a driveway wall. I don't know how far he got, but from the police arriving to Aaron leaving, there's about 15 minutes. But I know where we were found, and I know where he left from, and it's only about half a mile away, so I presume he's kind of like drove around a bit and come back on himself. Either which way, if you're listening on podcast you can't see, but on the video it's currently up. The car was completely wrote off when he crashed. He was apprehended, medically assessed, and then arrested. One of the knives that Aaron had used, probably the one that he attacked Peter with, was found in the footwell of the passenger seat. It was revealed in court that Aaron had a list of 21 previous offences, not all of which were convictions. These included assaulting a police officer, possession of a firearm, and arson, obviously as well as the GBH he got for beating his girlfriend. In October 2017, at Birmingham Crown Court, the judge said, "You have shown no remorse, indeed only regret that Mr. Wilkinson survived his injuries, and at the time satisfaction in what you achieved." The BBC did also report as well that during conversations with the police, he did say that he regretted not killing Peter. And the court also heard that hours after the arrest for the killings, he told police that "I've stabbed 3 people up. I ain't bothered about taking one of you with me." It wasn't straight away, it did take some while, but Aaron did plead guilty to 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. When passing sentencing, the judge told Aaron that she didn't impose the whole life tariff principally because of his youth. Instead, he was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years. However, the prosecution obviously appealed this. They said it were unduly lenient and insufficient for the most exceptional and grave case. Aaron appeared via video link from a prison, while the 3 judges agreed to increase his sentence. On the 21st of December 2017, his sentence was increased by the Court of Appeals to a minimum of 34 years, 178 days. Aaron's motive for the killings is still a mystery. No one actually knows what or why he did it. Peter only speculates that he thinks that it was because they cut off his contract. Really? They cut off your phone contract, so you're going to kill 2 people and try and kill a 3rd? 3 people that have really, really helped you in your life and gave you this exceptional opportunity. On Wednesday, the 7th of June 2017, Tracey and Piers arrived at St Mary's Church in Olds Winford. They were in a single white coffin. That is all I've got for this case. And again, it leaves me with no advice to give. How can you help in this situation? How can you help yourself in this situation? There is no good advice. I think not just a writer, I think people that watch true crime as well, we get the mean world syndrome, where we think the world's a lot worse than it is because we immerse ourselves in this dark news. And the reason I share these stories is so the person that did it will forever be known as the person that did it. The victims will be remembered for the people that they are. And in this case, 3 incredible people. Pierce was only a 13-year-old lad, but it looked like he had potential. His mom were a really, really kind woman that were trying to help, beyond doubt. She did more than were expected of her or anyone else. And obviously Peter helped in that. And look what they got from it. And the reason I mention mean world syndrome is because I don't think we should let people like Aaron make us put ourselves in this position where we don't help people. Because that's not okay. I don't think living in this society where we're all living in houses, watching TV alone from everyone else is not okay. We should be a community and we should help people. Maybe not to that extent. Maybe we should be able to do background checks on people. I don't know. Data protection and all that. It's a really hard case. It's a really hard story. And I'm really, really heartbroken by this because I like to help. My missus tells me off all the time for trying to help people. Not just trying to help people, but you shouldn't do that. What if you're a bad person and he could have kidnapped you? Baby, it's fine. So it's really bad. And I think that's the reason this story cuts so deep to me. Because you shouldn't be afraid to help people. And don't get me wrong, if you help somebody, you shouldn't expect things in return. But you certainly shouldn't be expected to be treated like that. That is outright wrong. And Dear God. And I also think 34 years for a 13-year-old and a 50-year-old life, plus an attempt to murder, is not on. 34 years, come on. I should also add that it was psychoanalyzed, and they said he didn't have out wrong with him, but he did have certain things wrong with him, but not enough to pass on diminished responsibility. So that's all for this episode, guys. Don't forget, I'm also on podcast. So if you want to check that out, check up my Linktree link in the description. Please do join my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I don't post as much as I should, but it's because I'm really busy at the minute. I'm just trying my best to get videos out on time. And before we end, I do just want to say, people have been asking me about Patreon. I'm not creating a Patreon. I will eventually, but not right now. I haven't got the time, and I don't think I've got enough content out there. So it will come eventually. If you do want to support me, you don't have to buy a membership or a Patreon. The biggest and best thing you can do to support me and the channel right now is share all of them if you want, but find your best video, find your best podcast episode, and share it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Tell your friends and family about it. That would support me loads. Thank you all for your support in every and any form. See you next week, guys.